All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our monthly All In for Kansas Kids Systems Building webinar for Wednesday, May 14th, 2025. My name is Julia Gruss. I am a research project coordinator with KU's Center for Public Partnerships and Research, and I am your webinar facilitator for today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Brianna Houston. She will be just monitoring the chat for any questions, as well as dropping any relevant links that you see throughout the PowerPoint into the chat as well. So again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, which they are ready to field your questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We will wait until the presenter is finished with the slide that they are on, and then we will interject with that question once they are through delivering the information on whatever slide they're reading from. All right, well, thank you again for being here, and we are going to get started. As always, our webinars are held on the second Wednesday of the month. Remember to sign up for the All In for Kansas Kids e-newsletter that goes out on a weekly basis, typically on Monday. You can sign up for that newsletter at www.kschildrenscabinet.gov. I need to update my slides. I did this to myself last month as well. It still says .org, but it is now .gov. We have a wonderful presentation today that is being presented by three wonderful people from Kansas Action for Children, Kansas Head Start Association, and Zero to Thrive. But I am going to let them introduce themselves, and they are going to be talking to us today about advocating for ourselves within our state and what that means, and how to get state decision makers, key decision makers, to listen and just how to have those conversations, how to advocate for ourselves. And then following that presentation, we'll just have a few early childhood systems updates, and then we will wrap up for the day. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Emily Barnes with Kansas Action for Children, who is going to get us started.
Thank you, Julia. I appreciate it. And if we could advance to the next slide, I'll start to introduce who all we have here. So thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm glad to get going. I'm excited to talk to you about advocacy, and whether you are new to advocating or freshening up some of your skills, this is an opportunity to gather some tools and tips to help you along your way. And I want to take a minute to introduce the group that I have with me. I'm Emily Barnes, and I'm the Education Policy Advisor with Kansas Action for Children. And I have Heather Schrotberger with me and Logan Stenseng as well. And we're going to talk about advocacy and the things that we have learned along the way as we have elevated early childhood topics. Quite frequently, our focuses are early childhood, so that's kind of the frame of reference we're going to come from in many ways. Advocating is incredibly personal. And so Heather and Logan, can I ask you all to just come off mute for a second and introduce yourselves very briefly and your organization? And while you introduce yourself, can you tell the group one situation that either brought you into advocacy or has impacted how you've continued to advocate along the way?
Sure. Thanks, Emily. I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Schrotberger, Executive Director with the Kansas Head Start Association. KHSA strengthens leadership, learning, partnership, and advocacy opportunities for Head Start families, staff, and programs, and we work in close partnership with our Head Start partners across the state. When I consider my own introduction to advocacy, honestly, it probably goes back to watching my own mom engage actively in school parent organizations to advocate not only for her own children, but for all children in our school through her volunteer roles. But my own interest in advocacy, though, is really rooted in my prior work in an early Head Start program where I had the opportunity to work closely alongside the parents from our program to make shared decisions about how we provided services. Logan?
Hey y'all, my name's Logan Stenseng. I'm originally from El Dorado, Kansas, and I currently am a Policy Strategic Initiative Coordinator with Thrive Kansas. And Thrive Kansas, we are a rural health wellness organization that really focuses on how can we improve the health and well-being of our rural communities. And so they, hired me on to work on advocacy for early childhood and childcare because that's a need in every community, but especially within our rural communities. And so I connect with a lot of communities across the state and talk about advocacy. And when I think about, my why and what got me started was, I was motivated to be involved in politics and advocacy outside of early childhood pretty early on, even in high school. Because, when I was taught in school, we learn about how wonderful our democracy is and how powerful having representative government and all these folks that are able to be a part of the process and how precious that is. Yet it always felt like everyone around me growing up was talking about how government was viewed negatively or dysfunctional. And so, I was just reminded that it's our government, our tax dollars, our public servants, and that, it should work for us to address the needs, to help us realize all of our aspirations for and dreams for our community. So, especially growing up from childhood to becoming an adult in 2016, the future has always felt kind of uncertain or chaotic. So I got involved because I wanted to be of service, to invest and to take care of my community, and really to protect our future so it can be prosperous. And so I was involved in voting rights organizations and campaigns. And then, I actually discovered this role the job I'm in now, where I got to work on advocacy related to addressing needs within early childhood. And for our rural communities, that's so critical. But as soon as you kind of dive into early childhood world and you realize the impact that quality early childhood has on children and on families, but just in the short term, but the long term, and realizing that, to ensure its protection, to safeguard its quality, to stand up for the vital workforce that does that work in early childhood, is work that really stands up and invests in our community's entire future, laying a really strong foundation. So I often think, hey, if, regardless of whether I'm not in this job, I will always be a lifelong early childhood champion because of the work that I've been inspired by and connected to a lot of folks that are like on this call. So that's a little bit of what keeps me involved.
Thank you. Those are both really important, helpful, impactful stories. So thank you. I appreciate that. Kansas Action for Children. So kind of to shift gears back to me, Kansas Action for Children is an advocacy organization that is working to help ensure that Kansas is the best state for children to grow healthy and thrive. And part of how we do that is that we pay attention to different areas that indicators that impact children's health. And we do that through some legislation, looking at how does legislation impact our children's lives, whether it's, health, economic security, quality early childhood, even, the taxes that, citizens pay. And we do our work by connecting and collaborating with lawmakers and other advocacy partners to ensure that we're elevating the well-being of our children. And so I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to be here today, because some people may know that actually I had been a family childcare provider before I became the education policy advisor at KAC. But what many people may not know is actually what kind of started my world in advocacy was I began to pay attention to the need for advocating when my oldest son's school was no longer able to offer Spanish education in the elementary grades. And I wasn't happy that he wasn't going to have that anymore. And as I learned more and more about it, it gave me an opportunity to pay attention to what was happening around us, what was happening for my child, but also for other children across the state. It made me begin to think of what I wanted for his experience and for the other students around him. And so that, in combination with my work in childcare, offered me many opportunities to advocate. And ultimately, those opportunities led me to KAC, where I get to do what I do today. I've learned many things over the years, and one of the things that I've learned is the benefit of relying on advocacy partners. Heather, Logan, and I often find that in our advocacy efforts, it's more effective when we work together. And so as we get started, we're going to give you insight into strategies that have helped us. And if we can go to the next slide, there we go. On our agenda, as you can see, we're pretty jam-packed today. By the end of our conversation, my hope is that we have done our job to help you understand what advocacy is and why you need it. And we'll do that by giving you some very basic information about Kansas government and a brief overview about the federal budget process. We'll also talk about how you can connect within your communities for information. And finally, we'll dig into how you can tell your story effectively and build the relationships that lead to positive impacts. So, what is advocacy? I think that's one of the first questions. Defined as a public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy, advocacy is in fact the foundation of our democracy. It's a way for citizens to influence public policy to bring about action or change. And often we find this happening through legislation. But as you'll hear later, there may actually be other actions that serve as advocacy as well. There we go. So the next question we need to ask is, why is it important? Last week, I had the opportunity to meet with our U.S. senators and representatives in Washington, D.C. In between meetings, I went to the Capitol building, and as I was walking into Exhibition Hall, the video playing at the entrance asked very clearly, "What do you want to change?" And said it just like that, just impact. And the magnitude of that moment absolutely hit me. In the midst of our nation's capital, with the busyness and the bustle of our government swirling around me, this most fundamental question sat front and center in my efforts that day. Advocating often happens on behalf of those with little or no voice, and Heather, Logan, and I most often advocate for children and their families. And as we go along in our presentation, I'm going to ask you to consider, what makes you want to advocate? What differences are you hoping to see? And what will it do for you? What will it do for your family or your community? Advocacy can feel very confusing and difficult, and so it's important to know why you are doing it. Ultimately, I imagine that you might be trying to make something better, and advocating is the way that you are able to bring about that change. All right, we can go to the next one. There we go. So, in order to do that, we're going to talk throughout all of my part for the educators out there, the WH questions, the who, what, when, where, why. But part of that is we need to talk about the what in a way, so I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts of our government. Kansas Action for Children focuses traditionally on state level legislation. How our state legislature operates frequently reflects the federal Congress, but we do have a few differences. And so I'll note some of those differences as we go along. Kansas is a part-time legislature. The federal Congress works throughout the entire year, and our citizen legislature operates for 90 days in Topeka. We often refer to this time as legislative session, or sometimes simply as session. It's fast-paced and very busy. Lawmakers' primary responsibility in Kansas is to pass a budget during the session. The legislature will also consider many other bills during this time, and some of those bills may become law. When the legislature is not in session, they continue to meet in the interim committees. These committees may be formed when the legislature wants to learn more about a specific topic. Perhaps during a session, a committee was unable to gather all the information that they wanted as they considered a different topic. Interim session, which usually happens in the fall, is an opportunity to hold hearings and invite experts and advocates to come speak about these issues. Often we see them meet as either an interim committee formed around a specific topic, or we may also see them as task forces. Although they might make recommendations to consider when the legislature returns the following January, these committees do not pass legislation. Our legislature is made up of two chambers. This is similar to the federal government as well, Senate and the House of Representatives. We hold elections on even years, and the House has 125 members who are elected every 2 years, and the Senate has 40 members who are elected every 4. There we go. So let's talk a little about the where and when. Knowing how the legislature functions also helps us know when we know the general flow of how the legislature works in order to be most effective. At our federal level, Our congresspeople meet throughout the year with breaks periodically to return to their districts and connect with their constituents. Legislation like the federal budget and bills will create federal laws that will pass at different times throughout the year. In Kansas, our lawmakers pass bills between January and May. This is really important to understand. That way you can most effectively be connecting and working on the right information. Each year, lawmakers return to the new session on the second Monday of January. During January and the beginning of February, new bills will be introduced and heard. As February progresses, bills will be worked and begin passing out of committees, and they'll head to their chamber floors for debate and passage. By March, many bills have moved to the opposite chamber. For instance, if a bill is introduced in the House of Representatives and it passes, by March, it will likely have begun its path through the Senate. The end of March sees a flurry of activity as lawmakers try to finish passing the bills, and anything that has not passed out of a committee by the end of March dies and will not continue for the rest of the year. After a bill has passed out of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, in order to become law, the language must match from both chambers. It's possible that each chamber, the Senate and the House, might have made different changes to the bills as it passed through each of their committees. When this happens, a conference committee meets to finalize the details, and the bills may go to the governor to be signed. The governor considers many bills that pass during April and May, and the governor will either sign a bill into law, allow it to become law without their signature after 10 days, or they will veto the bill. When they veto it, the legislature might decide to try to override the veto during veto session during April. Session generally ends in May, but it can in fact go longer. In 2025, the legislature met with an expedited calendar. This reduced the number of breaks that the lawmakers took during the session, and it ended about 3 weeks earlier than normal. The 2026 calendar has been announced, and they will repeat this expedited calendar. All right, we can keep going. So now that we know a bit about how the government functions, when you're going to see things progressing at different stages, let's focus on who does that work. A crucial part of advocating is knowing who to talk to when making those changes. And the legislature, in essence, is an important job on behalf of the state. The people in the legislature will make many decisions, and as with any other job, each person has a different role and responsibility. Here on this screen, we have pictures of the legislative leadership. This group of people have different roles that they have to fulfill in order to ensure that everything gets done. The Speaker of the House and the Senate President make decisions about how the legislature will operate. They appoint committee chairs and assign the members. They also decide which bills will go into the committees as they are introduced. The majority leaders determine when floor debates will happen as bills pass out of the committees and need to be considered by each chamber. Minority leaders make decisions for their party members as well. And in the next slide, we'll talk about committees. So the committees are one of the most important elements. Oh, if we can go back one, sorry. Elements of the legislative advocating. Some people often say that policy work is in fact people work, and the different committees are where that work happens. So today, I'm going to use the House Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development as our example. We can see the chair, the vice chair, and the ranking member. Each of those have a different responsibility. Specifically, the chair decides which bills in the committee are going to be heard and voted on. When a bill is introduced, it will be assigned to a committee like the Commerce Committee, depending upon its topic. And these members will hear the bill, which is a phrase you'll hear often. And that simply means that they will learn about what it will do, and they will listen to the constituents. Proponents of a bill often are in favor of what a bill will do, and opponents usually voice some concerns. The committee members may work the bill by offering amendments or changes and may decide to pass it out of committee. When you are following a bill that is important to your advocacy, getting to know the members of the committee can help you more effectively have your thoughts heard. All right, we can move to the next one. So that was a lot of information. And it's really likely that you may feel overwhelmed by what we just talked about. And that's okay. I want to start to talk about a resource that you may be able to explore and get familiar with. The legislature's website can help you find out all the information that I just told you. During session, I find myself on this page frequently multiple times per day. On the left side of the page, you can find general information about the legislature. These resources can help you if you need a reminder about any of the details that we just discussed, but you can also find information about lawmakers and specific bills. I find myself in the Find Bill and Find Your Legislator quite frequently. When you look at the tabs at the top, the ones that say House, Senate, legislators, committees, all those blue tabs up at the top, those have most of the information that you may actually need. You can click on those tabs for each chamber, and you can find everything from rosters of lawmakers to the seating chart on the chamber floors. The committee tabs tell you when committees meet, and you can find updated information about agendas and testimony. On the right side of the page, you can link to videos to watch the committee meetings when you cannot be in the State House while they work. It is important to note that although the Kansas Open Meetings Act requires that information for legislation is posted publicly, there might be a short lag in getting it up on the page. In the bustle of session, there are times when things might take a minute to be posted on this website. And so staying connected to others can help you remain up to date if you do not see something on the website in the way that you might expect. And although I would encourage you to explore this website and become familiar with it, it's also important to consider that this can be tricky to fully navigate. And so I want to also offer you some resources. Kansas Action for Children works to explain bills and legislative activity each week during our legislative session in easy to understand summaries. You can choose to opt in and join our newsletter at kac.org/join, and I'm sure at some point that'll end up in the chat. But these are ways that you can connect and have information. You're also going to hear from both Heather and Logan about connecting with organizations to better understand what's happening around you. And all of this combined can be helpful shortcuts to reduce your confusion and increase your relationship building opportunities. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So Heather and Logan are going to go into deeper detail about connecting with others in your advocacy and how to effectively tell your story, but I want to offer you a sample email just to get you started. Lawmakers are people with important jobs, and when it feels intimidating to reach out to them, remember that they do, in fact, want to hear from you, and it's appropriate to ask them to schedule a time to meet. And how that meeting looks can vary. It might be in person, it might need to be a phone call, or perhaps even a Zoom meeting. We can go to the next page. So I want to leave you with a couple of final thoughts. As I've continued in my advocacy work, there are two words that I hear most consistently: relationships and stories. Advocacy is about forming relationship with others to tell our stories while working for positive change. In order to effectively build relationships, we must also build trust. The way we conduct ourselves now can increase the likelihood of success later. And it's likely that you may disagree with or be disappointed by your lawmaker. But in those moments, it's important to remember not to argue or say hurtful statements. Respect is key. So I'm going to transition over to Heather to let her talk about what she sees in her work.
Thank you, Emily. As I shared earlier, I'm with the Kansas Head Start Association, and one of our primary areas of focus is advocacy alongside and on behalf of Kansas Head Start programs, staff, and families. Since Head Start is a federally funded program, much of our advocacy happens at the federal level. Emily shared the importance of understanding timelines and processes of the legislature in order to effectively advocate. As she mentioned, our federal delegation, both the senators and our individual representatives, spend much of their time in DC, but they return to their districts and connect with constituents throughout the year. Congress passes laws throughout the year as well, with specific timelines for some activities. The federal budget process is currently underway, and I'm going to provide a brief, very high-level overview of that process. The federal fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th. We're currently in fiscal year 25. The fiscal year is determined by the calendar year in which the budget period ends. So, for example, fiscal year 26 will begin this October of 2025 and end on September 30th of 2026. The federal budget includes three different types of spending: mandatory spending, which is spending that is authorized by law, such as Social Security; what's called discretionary non-defense spending, which is spending that is determined or appropriated by Congress annually for authorized programs and functions of the federal government that are for non-defense purposes; and then discretionary defense spending. That's spending that's determined by Congress annually for authorized defense programs and functions of the federal government. We'll go to the next slide. Again, this is a very high-level overview, but it gives you an idea of the general process. The first step in the discretionary budget process is when the White House releases the president's budget proposal. The Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, works with federal departments to establish spending recommendations and to finalize the president's proposal. This can happen each year as early as the first Monday in February, but often occurs later in the spring. For instance, the White House released the initial budget proposal on May 2nd at the beginning of the month for this year, for fiscal year 26. The president's budget includes recommended fiscal policies for spending levels, revenue, and the deficit. It includes priority programs, it can include specific program level budgets, and it can also include proposed changes to federal programs and tax policies. Next, Congress works to pass a budget resolution. If that is not done by April 15th, Congress puts temporary measures in place as needed until the final resolution is passed. The Congressional Budget Resolution outlines federal revenue levels and the 19 broad categories of federal spending, along with top line, or what is often referred to as 302A allocations. Both the House and the Senate must pass the budget resolution, but it is not signed by the president. There are several procedural rules and options, but in general, they have to agree on a resolution and pass it before budget work can continue. Next, Congress determines the appropriations for the fiscal year. The House and Senate appropriation committees take their top line, those 302A numbers, and assign specific funding levels, which you'll see referred to as 302B numbers, to subcommittees. And then the subcommittees hold hearings and allocate the funds by individual programs. Once the House and the Senate pass bills that are in agreement, the president signs the final budget into law. When that process doesn't happen by the start of the new fiscal year, Congress must pass a continuing resolution to keep the government funded at existing levels, or the government cannot continue to operate outside of essential functions. We also have a process that you may be hearing about in the news right now related to the budget that is called budget reconciliation. This is a process by which Congress can expedite spending and tax legislation, primarily for mandatory spending categories. Both processes, budget reconciliation and the fiscal year budget process, can overlap in timing as they are this year. Okay, next slide. So that was a really quick overview of the federal budget process, and there are lots of resources available if you want to learn more about kind of the nuts and bolts of that process. I'm going to transition now from how and when and where advocacy activities take place to look at an example of parent and family advocacy and how early education professionals and the parents and family members of young children can collaborate as advocacy partners. Since my background is in Head Start programming and my work at the Kansas Head Start Association is with Head Start programs and parents, I'm going to use the Head Start parent engagement model as a framework for discussing this topic. Head Start is a two-generational model for early education and family engagement. The Head Start Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Framework is a guide for the collaboration between Head Start programs and the parents and the families of the children in those programs. It touches on several positive outcomes for families, and one of those desired outcomes is families as advocates and leaders. The role of parents and family members as advocates is built into the Head Start model and even into the governance and leadership of Head Start programs, as staff, governing bodies, and parents share in decision-making about the design and delivery of Head Start services in local communities. We'll look here in a moment at the continuum of family advocacy, but let's look first at why engaging parents as advocates and leaders is so critical in early education settings. When parent and family voice is centered, valued, and prioritized, research demonstrates benefits to children, to families, and to the programs. Children benefit because their parents are recognized and supported as their first and most important teachers. And when parents are invited to advocate for and on behalf of their children, they positively influence their children's learning experiences. Additionally, opportunities for parents and family members to engage in advocacy and leadership are connected to positive outcomes for family well-being. The skills that parents develop as advocates and leaders can connect them to others with similar interests, create opportunity to pursue their own goals, transfer into future educational and career interests, and support increased financial stability. This is such an integral component of the Head Start model that programs are even required to track the number of staff who are current or former Head Start programs. And in the Kansas Head Start workforce, 20% of employees fall into that category. Programs also benefit from parent leadership and advocacy. Programs that provide parents these opportunities are more knowledgeable about their communities, they're in tune with community needs and opportunities, and they're better poised to contribute to community-based problem solving and solutions. We can go to the next slide. The Head Start family engagement model reflects the belief that all parents are advocates and that continued growth and development as an advocate happens along a continuum. And many of us can see ourselves probably as advocates somewhere along this continuum, from serving as advocates on behalf of those that are closest to us, which is often our children or our family members, within local settings such as our schools and our neighborhoods, or perhaps on a broader community level. For all of us, whether we are parents, early childhood professionals, or advocacy partners, as we connect with others and develop our skills and gain additional knowledge, we are better positioned to move along this continuum. In the Head Start model, this framework, This framework is grounded in the belief that all parents are advocates and leaders for their children. Parents and Head Start staff partner together to identify child and family goals, which provides parents the opportunity to advocate for their children's education and for themselves. Programs support parents in identifying and accessing community resources and services that they need, helping them navigate through those systems, encouraging parents to advocate for their children and themselves in all of those interactions. Programs also engage parents and other family members through opportunities to volunteer in classrooms and for school activities, to participate in parent committees, on parent policy councils, which I'll touch on in a moment, and in program governance. For some parents, this may naturally extend to engaging with the broader public and/or local, state, and federal policymakers to share their stories and experiences and to advocate on behalf of not only their own family and children, but other families as well. All of these opportunities engage parents in learning and applying new information and skills, understanding how decisions are made, and provide structured ways for parents to share their interests, experiences, and priorities with programs. This model sets the foundation for parents to continue to advocate for their children as they transition out of Head Start and into other educational settings. Supporting this advocacy continuum are several program components that invite and engage parents into advocacy and leadership opportunities. First, relationships built on trust, and this echoes what Emily shared at the end of her section. Relationships built on trust and respect between parents and staff are key to these types of advocacy partnerships. Strategies include recognizing parents as experts about their own children, valuing the individual experiences and perspectives of each parent, and maintaining continuous and ongoing communication. This relationship building and continuous communication positions parents and staff as equal partners. As parents engage in program advocacy and leadership, programs have a responsibility to offer parents the information and the professional development they need to effectively contribute to decision-making in ways that truly center their experiences and their priorities. Providing opportunities for parent-to-parent learning and support furthers the advocacy and leadership skills of all parents. I mentioned Head Start policy councils, and I want to explain these just a little further as they really reflect the alignment of this continuum and these program components. All Head Start programs are required to have a parent policy council for the purpose of shared governance. Federal law assigns specific roles and responsibilities to those policy councils. More than an advisory group, policy councils are tasked with decision-making alongside program leaders and staff about a variety of components of the Head Start program. These decisions touch on how services are delivered to children and families, partnerships in the community, policies and procedures of the organization, and the allocation of fiscal resources. They provide a structured way for parents to engage as advocates and leaders across this full continuum. Again, offering parents the opportunity to learn and apply advocacy skills that both shape the program, but also give parents the skills and knowledge they need to continue as advocates as their children leave the program, very much mirroring the way in which Head Start programs support children in developing the skills they need for positive outcomes in school and beyond. We can go to the next slide. So whatever your personal interests might be as an advocate, staying connected with other advocates will help you stay informed, to better understand important timelines and opportunities, and to provide you with advocacy tools and resources. Advocacy organizations exist at the local, state, and federal levels. If you aren't already connected to an advocacy community around the topic or issue that is important to you, you can consider the following opportunities. Locally, you may have parent groups, provider groups, or neighborhood groups that include advocacy as part of their focus and their work. At the state level, nonpartisan advocacy groups tend to organize around specific issues or concerns that are impacted by state policy decisions. Or direct service organizations, or those that represent and connect direct service providers, may include advocacy as part of their work in line with their mission. And our three organizations here with you today are good examples of all those different types of organizations. At the federal level, advocacy groups tend to organize in the same manner, but with a primary focus on issues or concerns that are impacted by federal policy decisions. In my work, two nonpartisan advocacy communities I interact with and look to for resources and information are the First 5 Years Fund, which focuses on a range of issues impacting young children and families, and the National Head Start Association, which has a narrower focus on Head Start advocacy. You can stay connected with advocacy communities by signing up for newsletters and action alerts, following them on social media, and attending gatherings and meetings. And so at this point, we're going to transition over to Logan to talk about making a difference with advocacy.
Hey, y'all. So how do we build power that makes a difference? I think Emily and Heather have done a wonderful job explaining, some of the state legislature, the roles, ins and outs, the value of advocacy, as well as the ins and outs of a little bit of an overview of the federal government, especially pertains to Head Start, as well as the process. But that still asks the question, how do I get involved? What are the ways that advocacy takes shape? And I think that often we are not taught how to do this. So, just to really get the most basic premise, I think the one that we hear most often when you talk about politicians and, elected folks is you talk about voting in elections. And it is critical. It's one of the best, one of the tools in the toolbox that we have to advocate for the issues that we care about. And just like what was just shared within the chat, ksvotes.org is an app that you can use to register to vote. You can share it with other folks for them to easily register, because that's one way to get prepared to have your vote heard, as well as KS Ballot is also another tool that folks utilize to essentially help them know what's on the ballot, because often that's one of the biggest issues with folks not getting involved or maybe not being aware of when to cast a vote is they got to know who, what do they stand for. And, I also highlighted an organization here called the Voter Network where they do peer-to-peer organizing. That's a group that is nonpartisan, and they're just helping folks stay tuned in and involved in the voting process. Because again, the more folks that vote and vote with their values, as it pertains to the community and the needs that we have, the better politicians, the better elected officials we have in those processes. And the primaries and general elections really are critical. Primary elections have extremely low turnout of like 15% or less of the population participating in them. But that's the time where we really create the menu of candidate options that we have. And those are critical periods of time when you can begin connecting with these potential candidates and to discuss the value of early childhood, to help educate them, because you are an expert in your field, your family, your program, and it really helps to ensure that they're educated on the subject. And it also highlights that every year is an election year. So there's local, state, federal elections, and I think we have talked a lot about the state and federal option, but local leaders, city council people, county officials, they impact ordinances, zoning, they foster private-public collaborations and local funding streams for childcare projects. And, so they can not only in their direct job do a lot to advance the cause of early childhood and related issues in your community, but they often are very great spokespeople to the folks in higher office, and they can often pursue higher office in the future. So think about it from the perspective if you're connecting with a city councilor about the value of early childhood, how critical it is, the needs and opportunities in your community, and they soon become a state legislator, then you have a trusted relationship with a local where they know the issues better than a lot of our legislators do without having connected with us first. And state legislators, as Emily highlighted, they impact laws, regulations, funding for state agencies. They govern funds, revenues such as the Children Cabinet, programs, as well as the creation of the new Office for Early Childhood. And they have the power to devise new projects and laws and funds to advance our values in early childhood. And a great reference is just look at other states. Look to state policies outside of Kansas and investments they're making in early childhood that really illustrate the creative potential power of legislators at the state level to champion and transform the future of early childhood. And then obviously, as Heather mentioned, federal leaders are very critical as well. They highlight, they cover Head Start, but they also impact huge pots of funding that are able to be allocated to the states from subsidy assistance, Medicaid, special education funding, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and so much more. So every leader is important, as well as connecting to our community to ensure that they know the process. So the next part is also to stay updated about your specific lawmaker's position on topics that affect you. Their social media and websites let you know what they prioritize, how they talk about issues, the more about their stories, and who they connect with regularly, because are they even tied into the early childhood world yet, as well as to talk directly with them. That's, I think, a really great resource. That's one of the best ways you can really learn how much they understand or know or have been impacted by early childhood specifically. You can talk to your colleagues beforehand. You can talk to different advocacy communities to maybe learn a little bit more about them before you meet with them. But honestly, some of the best ways is just, hey, have you heard about, when you meet with them, talk about and ask, hey, have you heard of this legislation or community problem? Here's my story and my perspective on it. What will you do to support or oppose this? And you'll learn where they stand. And often they need more information or on their way, and they're kind of on their own learning journey about early childhood. And reaching out and building a relationship begins the journey and helping them learn and prioritize this issue. And then also was what we just shared was the kansaslegislative.gov website, which Emily has already talked about. So I won't go at length, but I think this is also very valuable to learn about where and how legislators have voted on particular issues. So if you visit a bill and you see the total vote count, you can click on that, learn where they stood. But another opportunity just to learn more about the issues of the day, as well as where other Kansans stand on it, is when you visit those bills and specifically the committees that those bills are within, and you go to their testimony calendar and you click on the date that that bill had a hearing, you can then look at the list of proponent, neutral, and opposition testimony. And this is really valuable information to get a lay of the land. How are all kinds of stakeholders impacted by this potential law or policy? Is it seemingly popular or unpopular? What are the arguments in favor and against? As well as who are potential allies and opponents that you can connect with to learn more about the policy and its implications. And then, finally, like I already said, reaching out to your legislators is one of the best ways to really begin building power, is to connect with them directly by building a relationship, sharing stories, not only sharing your story, but learning about theirs, because you can often draw connections between them and position yourself as a trusted and connected constituent on the issues that matter most. Because again, these legislators do not have paid staff that assist them in research most often, especially the state legislative level. Congress, they may have folks, but they rely heavily on constituents and lobbyists that can advise them to help them understand more about the process, as well as there's more formal ways of connecting with legislators through submitting testimony, and then you talk to your legislators about it, say, hey, I testified in front of this committee. And all of this is so critical, these connection points between our legislators, inviting them to your program, locally meeting with them, having them meet your kiddos, and really establishing yourself as this is a priority, because there are a ton of priorities and government issues floating around in the halls of government. So the more you connect with them and remind them of these opportunities to invest and to support early childhood, it should be a higher priority list on their radar. And the last thing I'll say for this slide is, connect authentically, because there's a phrase in the advocacy world is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that really does apply outside of lobbying too, which may sound like you're just being annoying, and you kind of are to them, but that's the job, and we are standing up for our values. But that's what makes how we squeak, aka sharing our stories, so critical and important to being effective advocates. Next slide, please. And, those focuses previously were a lot on the emphasis on more political engagement. How do we advocate through elections as well as directly with our lawmakers? But not all advocacy is legislative. So you got a little definition there of what advocacy is public support for a recommendation or a particular cause or policy. And building that support really should not just be with our lawmakers, right? Because power is organized people and or money that can create, oppose, or stop change. And power is when we're talking about organized people, really we do that by building relationships with people in your community. So elected leaders, school district officials, neighbors, childcare task forces, other folks who are just leaders, economic development folks, families. All of these individuals are citizens in our community, and they have the power to stand up for the values that they care about. But again, they really aren't aware unless you are connected with them and talking. So, often that doesn't just look like, hey, I need your help talking about this specific policy, because as you're networking with your peers and families, wherever they are, that can look like talking to folks in the grocery store about your early childhood program. It can be talking about if you're tabling at an event at a county fair and you meet and you hand a resource about childcare assistance in your community. All of these different actions where we are standing up for the cause of early childhood, even if it doesn't feel political, we are asserting that this resource exists in our community. We're educating people that it's out there, and we're building relationships and we're building trust. Because we want these relationships to be sustained. We don't want just one-off relationships in community when it comes to building support for early childhood. We want this to be a lifelong commitment that not only the people in early childhood feel, but folks across the community feel. And that's also the role of advocacy coalitions, which was highlighted. I think those were great examples listed by Heather of different groups that you can join. One of the barriers I've often found in advocacy is that folks feel very individualistic, right? Like it's like, oh, I'm taking this action. How much does my singular voice matter? How will it be critical in affecting law and policy? And so it's so important to realize you are not alone, that there are many other individuals, thousands of Kansans, thousands of Americans who share your values, who want to take action alongside you. So make sure you stay connected to these advocacy coalitions so you can stay updated on opportunities to take actions, creative ways of outreach and building relationships in your community. And it's really one of the things, back on the last point, it helps take care of yourself too, because I often think of advocacy as like being in a choir where we are all in this together. And sometimes folks need to take a breath while other folks are singing, right? And being in that community, it really helps not feel as if the weight is all on you to make the change, but that you have the shared strength of the collective behind you, and that, you know, hey, you are always welcome, and we are encouraged to join back in that chorus so we can all sing beautifully the values of early childhood together. But it's really critical to take care of yourself, because you already are champions for early childhood in the own ways that you already advocate for your children and families. And this additional work of really trying to change law or change policy is additional work and labor, which can be taxing, but when done in community, it can be very validating, it can be energizing, and we can feel stronger together. So next slide, please. So a pretty critical part of all that advocacy, right? If it be informal, formal, you're out talking with folks in your community, you're talking to lawmakers, whatever the situation is, there all pertains to how you share your story. And one of the points that often folks stop themselves is, you know, in sharing it is, why me? You know, what do I know? What are, you know, I thought this is for folks who maybe view themselves as leaders or view themselves as these experts in something. Whereas, you know, you got to remind yourself that you are an expert in your family, your organization, and your community. And that policy, law, our communities, even outside of a political context, should be shaped by the values of us. It should be shaped by our experiences, because even though you're a specific expert in your lived experience, there's so much overlap with other folks in your community, right? And so just always remain grounded in that. Your lawmakers, your neighbors, these, you know, other elected officials, they need to hear your experiences and your values, and especially your expertise as it pertains to this, so that way we can make really good policy. So how do you build your story? Well, 3 things. Remain focused, because, you know, if I'm one that suffers from this when I'm talking about something I'm passionate about, sometimes I can ramble. So it's really critical to stay focused, you know, be, you know, pretty driven into the point of, you know why you are calling someone to action, why you're talking to them, what's the issue. But then remain positively charged, because, you know, when we are talking to individuals, we want to let folks know in our story where the problems are, what are the opportunities, you know, what's the stake of the situation and the impact if we do nothing. But that can often sound super negative. You know, we're leaving people in a place where we're like, oh man, this is not a great situation. So we always want to bring it back to being positively charged, to remind them, well, hey, you know, the reason why we're talking about this, the reason why it feels bad is because we really care about children. We really care about the workforce that supports early childhood. Whatever the issue is, there's a way that you can lean on your values, and especially if it's a shared value with you and whoever you're talking about, where there's an opportunity to take action to address the situation. And it's really much more positive because you are working on a solution and not fixating on the problem. And then practiced. You know, every story, the more you start thinking about it, the more you hone it down, it really does begin helping you get to that 30-second elevator speech, which is kind of, if you want to look at your story, right? The better you can synthesize it into like a 30-second elevator speech, the more you can elaborate on it if you have more time. But often with lawmakers, you may only have that 30-second window in an elevator or in passing at the grocery store. So to begin thinking about, because it could be daunting to think, hey, how am I going to distill this, you know, my stories into 30 seconds? Look to the questions on the right to begin thinking about stories specific to you and your community, and just start writing them. And, maybe initially you don't really have to think about the length, right? Just write from your heart, from your story, from your lived experiences, and then you can begin workshopping those stories and be like, well, hey, I really think this story that I have really does sell and drive the point that I want to make on this specific issue, or when I'm calling this person to action. Because then when you have your specific story, you can then include data and examples to support your information. And this is how you show that, hey, I'm talking to you about my story and how it impacts me as a local, as a constituent, as a neighbor. But this story that I'm sharing with you is really indicative of a larger trend, because then you're helping to illustrate that the problem that you're highlighting actually gets at a problem that much more people are experiencing, or that it has a more negative consequence down the road, or whatever the data it helps you illustrate. But then most importantly, what is your ask, right? Because we can talk about stories, we can talk about the problem, highlight the issues, the challenges, we can talk about our values even, but if we aren't calling people to action around them, if it be, hey, we'd love for you to come attend our childcare task force meeting, or we'd love for you to come to this advocacy event, we'd love for you to vote on this bill, this is what we're asking you to do. If you don't make that call to action, you aren't giving people an opportunity to live out their values. Because the number one reason why someone does not take action for a cause that they care about is they were never asked to begin with. So we got to get over that hesitation to ask people, make sure you're asking, because that's how we begin to really build trusted relationships where we can take action together. Next slide, please. All right, this is kind of where I'm going to end it. I don't really want to read just all these points verbatim, but the one thing I would say is that we all have a part to play in building a world-class early childhood system in Kansas. Every single one of us, not just the folks in early childhood, people outside of early childhood too, because it all impacts us. So the more that we learn how to share our stories with our community, with our neighbors, to build that support is in working together to create a stronger, thriving future for Kansas early childhood. We're building a stronger, healthier, more prosperous future for us all. And by doing that, by doing everything these slides say, we are really advancing this cause. And I hope that you also know you can always connect with us as well to learn more and to talk, because again, it's not just about you connecting with other people, connect with us too, because we're all in this together. We're this big, wonderful community of advocates and folks across Kansas that care about this issue. And I'm just thank you all for being on.
Thank you, Logan. I appreciate that. And if we can go to the next slide, we are at time, but I want to make sure we provided a lot of information, and I want to make sure that if there are questions that we adequately answer them. First of all, if anyone needs to go, certainly I want to respect your day. But we have our contact information here where you can reach Heather, Logan, and I at our emails. And ideally, we can help direct you to the source of where you may be able to find your best answer if we're not able to provide it. But Julia, did you have any questions that would be helpful for us to answer before the end of our presentation?
Thank you so much, Emily. And no, not that I can think of right now. I've just got people in the chat saying that this was great information that needs to be shared over and over. And just thank you for sharing. As always, anybody, if you think of a question after the fact, feel free to take down these email addresses for Emily, Heather, and Logan. You can also always reach out to me and I can pass your questions on to them if anything pops up. But I am not seeing any questions, and I do not have any myself either.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I think the one last thing that I'll leave you with in all of this, come to it from where you're at. There's every person comes to advocacy in a personal way. What you are able and interested in providing at this moment may not be what someone else does, but it's still valuable. And so as we look towards solutions, as we look towards connection, know that you are a valuable part in advocating in Kansas. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I would say we can wrap up.
I was going to
Beautiful.
highlight,
Thank you. Logan, yeah, go ahead. I saw your hand.
there was a question in the chat that was sent to me where they asked if we could come present to local groups. And I'm not sure if you'd be able to get all three of us, but I know that that's something I do a lot. So we could always talk, but we love to connect locally with our leaders, especially if you're talking with your families or your different, professionals and little networks in your community. We would love to connect to talk more in depth, and we can even niche out to whatever focus area you want to talk about, and we can meet in advance. So just let all you all know that we do travel quite a bit. Maybe some more than others, especially me being in rural. We do travel quite a bit to meet people where you're at.
Thanks, Logan. Yep. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you. That was very valuable information. I think everybody took something home today that they may not have known or were just refreshed. So we appreciate that. And before I send everybody home, we do have a couple of early childhood systems updates real quick. And I'm going to skip over mine real quick just because I want to make sure that Emily gets the chance to present on Sun Meals Kansas before everybody hops off here. So Emily, if you want to hop off of mute, you can go ahead and take over.
Sure, thanks. So I just had a little piece of information to share as our school districts are wrapping up their school year. We are moving into summer break, and that means that our sponsors are moving into their summer meal programs. So our sponsors could be anybody from our school districts, libraries, church organizations, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, any nonprofit organizations all over the state. And so this summer, to promote our summer meal sites, we have these little business cards, and they're just little business card size, but this is what they look like, the front and the back, that we are ready to distribute all over the state, to pass out to families, organizations that are willing to hand these out for us, to get them in the hands of families to bring kids to these summer meal sites, and help fill that summer feeding gap. So at any of these sites, summer meals are free for kids ages 1 to 18. On the back side of the business card is this little apple with the QR code. And so that will take you to a map that is updated daily of all of our summer meal sites. And that's here on this next slide. Like I said, it's updated daily. And so our sponsors are busy working to be approved right now for all of their sites for the summer. So even since I took this screenshot last week, we've had, tons. I don't know an exact number, but we've had a lot more sites added to the map. So encourage families, your organizations, anybody that can promote these summer feeding sites and these meals to go check out the map. And if you would like any of the business cards, you can send me an email, and we're happy to send those out here from our office. Again, we just want to get them in the hands of families to help fill that summer feeding gap while schools are out for the summer. And so let us know if you have any questions. Meals that they serve, anywhere from breakfast, lunch, snacks, suppers, depends on the site, and all of that information. When you get to this summer feeding map, when you click on the little purple circles, that will give you all the information for the site. So days they're open, meals that they're serving, times, any special information that you need to know is all there. So yeah, I can put my email in the chat box, and just let me know if you'd like any cards to pass out in your communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That's great information, and what an amazing program as well. So I just have 2 quick updates to go over, and then I will let y'all leave for the rest of the day and continue your workday through 5. So first off, we have some free mental health care for childhood providers. This is being brought to you by the Mindful Collective, who are also the founders of Mindful Minis, which is a mental health informed childcare center in Derby. Via grant funding, they will collaborate and bring providers across Kansas in person or virtual mental health services to support your childcare work. So you can learn more by following the link in the chat. And also, Madeline and Bailey are the two founders of Mindful Minis, and they will be here at our All In for Kansas Kids webinar next month to talk about that mental health informed childcare center. So if that's something that you are interested in, please join us again in June, as they will be here presenting with us. And then also, in case you missed it, some funding opportunities through CBCAP. There's new community-based child abuse prevention funding opportunities. Competitive RFP is coming soon, which actually I believe it went live today, as did the applications. So this community-based child abuse and neglect prevention funds, they will support primary and secondary prevention efforts. Primary prevention includes efforts targeted to the broader community to strengthen families and prevent the likelihood of abuse or neglect. And secondary prevention efforts are targeted to special populations as a means of providing preventative family strengthening support. So the community-based requests can be up to $300,000, and the statewide funding requests can be up to $400,000. And yes, that RFP and the applications went live today. There is also going to be a technical assistance webinar held tomorrow, May 15th at 2 p.m. Link to register for that is in the chat as well, to get more information on these funds and what you can use them for and how to apply. The applications will be due by June 23rd, 5 p.m. And then there is another link in the chat just to learn more about this opportunity as a whole. So skipping over those Sun Meals Kansas, lastly, we have our reminders and our next steps. The Early Childhood Recommendations Panel is being held this Friday, May 16th from 9 to 11:30 a.m. The next Children's Cabinet meeting is going to be held on Friday, June 6th from 9 to noon. And our next Early Childhood Systems Building webinar is going to be held on Wednesday, June 11th from noon to 1. As always, you can find these meetings and sometimes watch the live streams on the Children's Cabinet YouTube channel. That's a reminder that this webinar from today as well will be put up there, the recording. So if you want to share that with anybody, that should go live by tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I usually try to get these recordings up as soon as possible so you can share them and go back and watch. So thank you for joining us. As always, you can stay up to date by signing up for that All In for Kansas Kids e-newsletter and by subscribing to the Children's Cabinet YouTube channel. We appreciate you all today. We appreciate our presenters and Emily for sharing the Sun Meals Kansas information. Thank you and have a very happy Wednesday and enjoy the rest of your week.